In a city where police corruption had evolved into an art form, James Holloway committed the ultimate sin. He kept records. For decades, the retired forensic accountant documented every missing million, every fabricated charge, every laundered dollar funneled through the Cavendish Trust, a shadow operation connecting the police department to the highest offices in the state. Chief Huxley thought arresting James would bury the evidence. A simple detention, an intimidation tactic used countless times before. He didn't count on Malcolm Holloway, James's son, and a federal judge with a reputation for dismantling corrupt empires piece by piece. Now, as James is held in a classified facility by private military contractors, his meticulously gathered evidence is becoming the weapon that might bring down not just corrupt officers, but governors, senators, and the corporate puppet masters who've built their fortunes on stolen police pensions. In the coming war between the Holloways and the system they're exposing, one thing becomes clear. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the most power, but the one with nothing left to lose. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The evening sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as James Holloway walked with a measured pace toward Wilson's corner store. At 68, his body moved a bit slower than in his prime, but his mind remained razor-sharp. Decades spent hunting financial criminals through labyrinthine accounting records had honed his attention to detail. Though retired for 5 years now, the habits of observation never left him. James adjusted his glasses and nodded to Mrs. Patterson watering her petunias. This walk to Wilson's had been his evening ritual since moving to the quiet neighborhood. 6 blocks to get fresh air, pick up the newspaper, maybe a pint of ice cream if the grandkids were visiting that weekend. What James didn't know was that his routine had been noted, cataloged, and marked for exploitation. Inside the patrol car, parked across from Wilson's, Officer Derek Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. 3 months out of the academy, and already he felt the weight of expectations pressing down on him. "Targets approaching," said Officer Brian Carter, tapping the steering wheel. At 26, Carter had 2 years on the force and carried himself with the false confidence of someone desperate to belong. "Remember what Sergeant Willis said? This guy's a troublemaker, always sticking his nose where it doesn't belong." Mitchell frowned. "What exactly did he do?" "Don't need the specifics," Carter replied, eyes following James as he entered the store. "Orders came from the top. We're just doing our job, keeping an eye on potential agitators." Mitchell remained silent, watching James through the store window. There was nothing threatening about the elderly black man in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt. Nothing that screamed troublemaker, but questioning orders wasn't how you survived your rookie year. Across the street, in an unmarked sedan with tinted windows, a man in an expensive suit observed the officers. He made a brief call. "Target has entered the location. Officers are in position." Inside Wilson's, James moved through the familiar aisles, nodding to Tom Wilson behind the counter. He noticed 2 black teenagers, maybe 16 or 17, being followed closely by the new clerk, a nervous young man James hadn't seen before. "Can I help you find something?" the clerk asked the teenagers, his voice carrying an edge of suspicion. "We're just looking," one of the teens replied, clearly uncomfortable. James watched as the clerk continued hovering, occasionally touching the phone in his pocket. The boys were simply browsing the snack aisle, yet the clerk's behavior suggested they were seconds away from armed robbery. The teenagers selected a few items and approached the counter. The clerk scrutinized each product as if checking for hidden weapons. "ID," the clerk demanded when they tried to purchase energy drinks. "We're just buying chips and soda," the taller teen explained. "Store policy, no ID, no service." James had seen enough. He approached the counter, newspaper tucked under his arm. "Tom Wilson never had that policy in the 15 years I've been coming here." The clerk startled. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "I believe it does," James replied calmly. "Selective enforcement of non-existent policies is discrimination. That has consequences." "Are you threatening me?" The clerk's voice rose. No, James said. I'm educating you. I'll take my newspaper, and these young men will take their purchases. Then I'm going to have a conversation with Tom about his new hiring practices. The clerk's face flushed red. I'm calling the police. They're already outside, James noted, gesturing to the patrol car. Been watching the store for nearly an hour. The teenagers exchanged worried glances. James turned to them. Pay for your items. I'll wait with you. Outside, Mitchell and Carter observed the exchange through the window. Looks like we've got our agitator in action, Carter said, reaching for the door handle. Shouldn't we wait until something actually happens? Mitchell asked. Carter shot him a look. Something is happening. Let's go. As the officers entered, James was helping the teenagers collect their change. Is there a problem here? Carter asked, hand resting casually on his holster. No problem, James responded. These young men were making purchases. I was doing the same. Store clerk called in a disturbance, Carter said. Said you were threatening him. That's not what happened, one of the teenagers began, but Carter silenced him with a glare. ID, Carter demanded, looking at James. For what reason? James asked. I've broken no laws. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably as Carter took a step closer to James. Sir, we just need to verify your identity. Am I being detained? James asked, his voice steady. Because if not, I'll be on my way. Carter moved to block the exit. We've received reports of a disturbance. Standard procedure is to identify all parties involved. Reports from a clerk who was harassing these young men, James clarified. I simply intervened. ID. Now. Carter's voice hardened. I know my rights, officer, James said. Unless you're detaining me for specific suspicion of a crime, I'm not obligated to identify myself. Carter's face darkened. Mitchell watched the situation deteriorating, but felt powerless to intervene. Why are you being difficult? Carter demanded. Just show us your ID. Because selective enforcement of non-existent requirements is a pattern I'm familiar with, James replied. And I don't enable patterns of discrimination. Carter stepped forward, invading James's personal space. One last chance. I'll be leaving. Now, James said, attempting to step around Carter. What happened next unfolded with sickening speed. Carter shoved James backward. The elderly man stumbled, catching himself against a display rack. Officer, that was unnecessary, James said, straightening his glasses. I'd like your badge number. Carter grabbed James's arm, spinning him around and slamming him against the counter. You're under arrest for resisting and obstructing. I've done neither, James said, grimacing as his arm was wrenched behind his back. Mitchell finally intervened. Hey, maybe we should cuff him, Carter ordered, ignoring Mitchell's hesitation. Outside, several bystanders had gathered, phones raised, recording the escalating situation. The man in the unmarked sedan smiled slightly, then made another call. Phase 1 complete. Target is being detained. As Mitchell reluctantly applied the handcuffs, he noticed something odd. Carter was smiling, as if this outcome had been the goal all along. James was escorted roughly to the patrol car, dignity intact despite the circumstances. You're making a serious mistake, he told the officers calmly. One you'll have cause to regret. Save it for the judge, Carter sneered, forcing James's head down as he placed him in the back seat. Across town, Police Chief Raymond Huxley's phone chimed with an incoming message. He opened it to find a photo of James Holloway being led away in handcuffs. A slow smile spread across his face as he typed a response. Keep him there. No calls, no processing until I arrive. Then he added, Holloway thinks he's so smart. Let's see how he handles a night in lockup. Huxley leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the city skyline. 15 years ago, James Holloway had nearly destroyed his career with a forensic audit that came dangerously close to exposing Huxley's network of kickbacks. Only carefully placed connections had saved him. Now, fate had delivered his old enemy directly into his hands. At the 33rd Precinct, known unofficially as the Dungeon for its reputation as the most corrupt station in the city, James sat handcuffed to a bench. He'd requested a phone call 3 times. Each time, the desk sergeant found a new reason to delay. Systems down, he claimed first. Booking officers on break came next. "We'll get to you when we get to you," was the final answer. James observed everything with the methodical attention of a man who had spent decades following paper trails. Which officers avoided eye contact? Which ones seemed uncomfortable with the situation? The missing intake forms, the deliberate delays. Every detail, filed away for future reference. Near midnight, the precinct door opened. A man in an immaculately tailored suit entered, briefcase in hand. He approached the desk sergeant, speaking too quietly for James to hear. The sergeant nodded, then glanced toward James with an expression that might have been pity. The suited man turned, studying James with calculating eyes before disappearing into the back offices. 10 minutes later, James was moved to an interrogation room, still denied his phone call. As the door closed behind him, James Holloway sat straight-backed in the uncomfortable metal chair. Whatever game they were playing, he recognized the tactics: isolation, uncertainty, psychological pressure. The same techniques used to break financial criminals during his active years. James smiled slightly. They had no idea who they were dealing with, or more importantly, who his son was. Judge Malcolm Holloway's courtroom fell silent as he delivered his verdict. The defendant, a city councilman charged with embezzling public funds, seemed to shrink in his expensive suit as Malcolm's voice cut through the hushed chamber. "The evidence presented leaves no room for doubt or leniency," Malcolm stated, his deep voice carrying to the farthest corners of the room. "This court sentences you to 15 years without possibility of parole, the maximum allowed by law." The councilman's attorney jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, my client is a public servant with decades of—" "Your client," Malcolm interrupted, "systematically stole from programs meant to help the city's most vulnerable citizens. He will serve his sentence at Mitchell Federal Penitentiary, not one of those minimum security country clubs reserved for white-collar criminals." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Malcolm Holloway's reputation for harsh sentences against corrupt officials was well earned. At 42, he had become the most feared judge in the district, known for his encyclopedic knowledge of the law and his complete immunity to political pressure. As Malcolm gathered his papers, his clerk approached, with a note. "Your Honor, this was marked urgent." Malcolm unfolded the paper, his expression unchanging as he read its contents. Only those who knew him well would have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. "Court is adjourned," he announced, rising abruptly. "We will reconvene tomorrow at 9. In his chambers, Malcolm closed the door and immediately dialed a number from memory. "Eleanor," he said when the call connected, "I need everything you can find on Officers Derek Mitchell and Brian Carter from the 33rd Precinct. Full personnel. Files, disciplinary records, financial statements, social media, everything." Eleanor Hayes, a powerhouse attorney with connections throughout the justice system, didn't waste time asking why. "When do you need it?" "Yesterday," Malcolm replied. "They've arrested my father." There was a momentary silence. "James? On what? Charges?" The note just said he's being held at the 33rd. No charges specified, no details provided. "The dungeon," Eleanor said, her voice hardening. "That's Huxley's precinct." "Exactly," Malcolm replied. "That's what concerns me. Pull those records, then meet me at my office in an hour." Malcolm ended the call and stood motionless for a moment, thinking. Police Chief Raymond Huxley had been a shadow lurking at the edges of his father's life for years. James rarely spoke about it, but Malcolm knew Huxley had been implicated in one of his father's forensic investigations, something involving fraudulent contract bids and missing funds. At the 33rd Precinct, James Holloway sat alone in the interrogation room. 4 hours had passed since his arrest. No charges filed, no phone call allowed, no lawyer present. Every procedural violation carefully noted in his mental ledger. The door opened, and Officer Carter entered with a cup of water. "Comfortable, old man?" James didn't respond, simply watching Carter with the unwavering attention of someone accustomed to finding discrepancies in careful facades. "Not so talkative now, huh?" Carter placed the water just out of reach. "Maybe a night in lockup will loosen that tongue." "I'd like to make my phone call," James stated calmly, It's been over 4 hours since my arrest. Carter laughed. Yeah, about that. Turns out the phones are down. City-wide technical issue. Very unfortunate. I see, James replied. And the charges against me? We're still figuring that out, Carter said with a smirk. Lot of paperwork involved. Might be tomorrow before we sort it all. James nodded slightly. I understand. And when my son discovers I'm being illegally detained without charges, without access to counsel, in direct violation of department policy and constitutional law, I imagine there will be some paperwork involved then as well. Carter's smirk faltered. Your son, what's he gonna do, sue the department? Get in line. My son, James said quietly, doesn't need to sue. He simply needs to sign his name. Before Carter could respond, the door opened again. A desk sergeant appeared, looking uncomfortable. Carter, you're needed outside. Detective Reynolds wants to speak with you. Carter shot James a final glare before leaving. The sergeant carefully avoided eye contact with James, hurrying out behind the officer. In the hallway, Detective Elijah Reynolds waited, case file in hand. At 45, Reynolds was a 20-year veteran of the force, with salt and pepper, hair, and the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much to maintain illusions about the system he served. What's going on with the Holloway arrest? Reynolds asked, flipping through the haphazard paperwork. Carter shifted uncomfortably. Resisting and obstructing, maybe disorderly conduct. Really? Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Because there's no actual arrest report here. No Miranda documentation, no processing forms. We're getting to it, Carter replied defensively. Sergeant said to hold off on processing. Under whose authority? Carter hesitated. Orders from above. Reynolds closed the file. Above who exactly? Before Carter could answer, the precinct doors opened. A tall man in an expensive suit entered, flanked by 2 uniformed officers from Internal Affairs. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. That's Deputy Commissioner Wallace, the desk sergeant whispered. Chief Huxley's right-hand man. Wallace approached the front desk. Where is the Holloway suspect being held? Interrogation room C, the sergeant replied, pointing down the hallway. Wallace nodded to his escorts. Ensure no one enters that room without my explicit authorization. This is now a matter of public safety. Reynolds stepped forward. Sir, with respect, on what grounds is Mr. Holloway being held? There's no proper arrest documentation. Wallace turned cold eyes toward Reynolds. Detective, this individual has been identified as a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. That's all you need to know. An investigation into what? Reynolds pressed. Detective, Wallace said, quietly. I suggest you focus on your assigned cases. This matter is above your pay grade. Reynolds watched as Wallace disappeared down the hallway, the Internal Affairs officers taking up positions outside the interrogation room. Across town, Eleanor Hayes worked furiously at her computer. Her office at Hayes Legal Partners occupied the entire top floor of a downtown high-rise, offering a commanding view of the city skyline. Tonight, she barely noticed the glittering lights as she dug through restricted databases. Her phone rang. Malcolm, I've got something, she said, skipping. The greeting. Officer Carter has 3 excessive force complaints in 2 years, all against black suspects, all dismissed. Officer Mitchell is straight out of the academy, no record yet. What about financial irregularities? Malcolm asked. Carter's living beyond his means, Eleanor replied. Condo in Riverdale, new Audi, vacation property in the Poconos. No family money, no secondary income source I can find. Someone's padding his account, Malcolm concluded. It gets worse, Eleanor continued. I pulled the dispatch logs. There was no call from Wilson's corner store, no complaint filed. The officers were already on scene when the incident occurred. They were waiting for him, Malcolm said, his voice hardening. This was planned. Malcolm, Eleanor hesitated. I found something else. There's a sealed file in the department database tagged with your father's name. It's classified above my clearance level. Can you crack it? Not remotely, Eleanor admitted, but I know someone who might be able to help. Give me an hour. Malcolm ended the call and stared out his office window. From the 30th floor of the courthouse building, he could see the lights of the 33rd precinct, 12 blocks away. His father was there, illegally detained, while corrupt officers fabricated charges against him. Malcolm reached for his phone again, dialing Judge Harriet Watkins, the senior judge on call for the night. "Harriet, it's Malcolm Holloway. I need an emergency release order for a detainee at the 33rd precinct." "Malcolm?" Judge Watkins sounded surprised. "It's almost midnight. This can't wait until morning?" "My father is being held without charges, denied his right to counsel in violation of department policy," Malcolm explained. "I need that order." Now there was a pause. "Your father, James Holloway?" "Yes. Can you issue the order?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll need to review the circumstances. The system shows he's being held in connection with an ongoing investigation." Malcolm frowned. "What investigation? What charges?" "It doesn't specify," Watkins admitted, "but it's flagged with high-level security clearance. I can't override that without proper authorization." "Harriet, you know me. You know my father. This is a clear violation of his rights." "I'm sorry, Malcolm," she said, sounding genuinely regretful. "My hands are tied on this one. The order came from above." "Above who?" Malcolm demanded. "I can't say more," Watkins replied. "I suggest you go through official channels in the morning." The call ended, leaving Malcolm staring at his phone in disbelief. Judge Watkins had never refused a legitimate legal request before. Something was very wrong. His phone rang again. Eleanor. "They've moved him," she said without preamble. "My contact just informed me they're transferring your father to a different facility." "Where?" Malcolm asked, already grabbing his coat. "The Blackwood Center." Malcolm froze. The Blackwood Center was not a standard detention facility. Officially, designated as a special processing center for high-risk detainees, it operated outside normal judicial oversight, used primarily for terrorism suspects and high-level security threats. "That's impossible," Malcolm said. "They can't possibly justify sending him there." "Someone's pulling major strings, Malcolm," Eleanor replied. "My contact says the transfer order came directly from the governor's office, citing national security concerns. My father is a retired accountant." "Was he working on anything sensitive before he retired?" Eleanor asked. "Anything involving government contracts or officials?" Malcolm thought back to conversations with his father years ago. James had mentioned an investigation into defense, contracts, municipal fund allocations that didn't add up, missing millions that seemed to vanish into offshore accounts. "Maybe," Malcolm admitted, "but that was years ago." "Something spooked them," Eleanor said. "Something big enough to risk illegally detaining a citizen with a son who happens to be a federal judge. That's not a small risk, Malcolm." "I'm going to the Blackwood Center," Malcolm decided. "You can't," Eleanor protested. "They won't even acknowledge he's there. You'll compromise your position and then you can't help him from the inside." Malcolm paced his office, mind racing through legal strategies, procedural options, emergency motions he could file. "We need to know what they think he has," Malcolm said finally. "What could possibly justify this level of response?" "I'm working on it," Eleanor assured him. "My contact is trying to access the sealed file. But Malcolm, be careful. If they're willing to go this far already—" "I know," Malcolm replied grimly. "This isn't just about an illegal arrest anymore. Someone is trying to bury something big, and they think my father is the key." At the 33rd precinct, Detective Reynolds watched as James Holloway was escorted from the interrogation room by the internal affairs officers. James walked with dignity despite the handcuffs, his eyes scanning the room, noting faces, positions, details. Their eyes met briefly. Reynolds saw no fear in the older man's gaze, only a calculating intelligence. James gave him the slightest east nod before being led out a side entrance where an unmarked black SUV waited. Reynolds turned to his computer, quietly logging into the case management system. The file on James Holloway had been completely scrubbed, replaced with a simple notation. "Transfer authorized under Executive Order 1792, Classified Protocol." Reynolds had never seen that protocol code before. He wrote it down, then cleared his search history. As he was preparing to leave, Officer Mitchell approached, looking troubled. "Detective," Mitchell said quietly. "About the Holloway arrest." "Not here," Reynolds murmured, gesturing toward the exit. Outside, in the precinct parking lot, Reynolds lit a cigarette. "What's on your mind, rookie?" Mitchell glanced around nervously. Something's not right about what happened today. The way Carter pushed for that confrontation like he was expecting it. And now this high-level transfer? You asking questions, Officer Mitchell? "I just want to know if we did the right thing," Mitchell said. "Mr. Holloway didn't seem like the troublemaker we were told to watch for." Reynolds studied the younger officer. "Sometimes in this job you find yourself caught between what's legal and what's ordered. Start asking yourself which side you want to be on." "I became a cop to help people," Mitchell said. "Then remember that," Reynolds replied, crushing out his cigarette, "because I think things are about to get complicated." As the black SUV carrying James Holloway disappeared into the night, a mysterious figure watched from the shadows. The same well-dressed man who had observed the initial arrest now spoke quietly into a secure phone. "Phase 2 complete. Target secured. Proceeding with containment protocol." He listened briefly, then responded, "Yes, the sun is already making moves. Exactly as predicted. The chess pieces were in motion, the board was set, and James Holloway, a seemingly ordinary retired accountant, had somehow become the central piece in a game with stakes higher than anyone yet realized." Malcolm Holloway stared at the rain pelting against his office window, the nighttime city lights blurring into watery smears. 24 hours had passed since his father's arrest, and the sense of powerlessness was eating him alive. Behind him, the door opened with a soft click. "You look terrible," Eleanor said, placing a coffee on his desk. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her normally immaculate suit slightly rumpled from an all-night research session. "Any word from your FBI contact?" Malcolm asked, ignoring the coffee. Eleanor nodded, lowering her voice despite the privacy of Malcolm's chambers. "Thomas called. He says your father's name appeared in an ongoing federal corruption probe, something called Operation Blacklight. It's classified well above Thomas's clearance level." "That makes no sense," Malcolm said, raking fingers through his short-cropped hair. "My father's been retired for 5 years. What could he possibly have to do with an active federal investigation?" Eleanor perched on the edge of his desk. "Thomas couldn't access details, but he said the case involves historical financial crimes. Apparently, they've been building it for over a decade." Malcolm frowned. "Did he have any information about the Blackwood Center?" "Only that it's used for high-value detainees who possess sensitive national security information." Eleanor hesitated. "Malcolm, no one gets lawyer visits at Blackwood. It operates under counterterrorism protocols. They can't just disappear a U.S. citizen without due process." Eleanor's laugh was hollow. "Tell that to the dozens of people already held there." Malcolm turned back to the rain-streaked window. "There has to be a legal avenue. I've filed emergency motions with every judge in the district," Eleanor said. "They've all been mysteriously reassigned or delayed. Someone's blocking us at every turn." Malcolm's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Judge Holloway," came a voice disguised by an electronic filter. "Your father is being interrogated by Agent Marcus Webb of the Financial Crimes Task Force. They believe he has information about offshore accounts tied to defense contracts from 2018. "Who is this?" "Someone who believes in justice," the voice replied. "Meet me at Riverside Park East Entrance 1 hour. The line went dead. Malcolm looked at Eleanor. "I need to go." "That's obviously a trap," she warned. "Maybe," Malcolm conceded. "But right now it's all we have." At the Blackwood Center, a nondescript concrete building with no exterior signage, James Holloway sat across from a man in a charcoal suit. The windowless room held only a metal table and 2 chairs. A camera blinked in the upper corner. "Mr. Holloway," said the man, his voice precisely modulated. "I'm Agent Webb. Do you know why you're here?" James folded his hands calmly. "I know this detention is illegal. I know my constitutional rights are being violated. Beyond that, I assume this relates to something I uncovered during my professional career." Webb opened a thin file. Project Cavendish, he said, watching James's face. Does that name mean anything to you? A flicker of recognition crossed James's features before he carefully controlled his expression. I investigated many projects over 40 years. Names blur together. This one wouldn't blur, Webb pressed. 20 years ago, you performed a forensic audit on defense contracts flowing through the state, specifically infrastructure security upgrades. I performed hundreds of audits. Webb leaned forward. Mr. Holloway, we know you kept records. Personal notes that never made it into official reports. We need those records. Even if such records existed, James replied evenly, I've been retired for 5 years. Ancient history. Not ancient to the people who stand to lose everything. If those records surface. Webb's tone hardened. People with enough influence to make you disappear into a hole so deep your federal judge son would never find you. James maintained his composed exterior, but his mind raced. The Cavendish Project. Of course he remembered. The missing millions, the irregular signatures, the offshore transfers, all pointing to a massive embezzlement scheme involving military supply contracts. He'd been ordered to drop the investigation, told it was a matter of national security. But he'd kept digging privately, kept his own records. I want to see my son, James said finally. Webb closed the file. Cooperate, and maybe that becomes possible. Continue stonewalling, and this conversation moves to less comfortable surroundings. Meanwhile, Malcolm sat on a park bench, collar turned up against the persistent drizzle. The park was nearly empty, the rain discouraging casual visitors. A slender woman with short silver hair approached, sitting beside him without making eye contact. Judge Holloway. You're not who I expected, Malcolm observed. Judith Winters, investigative reporter, Washington Post, she replied quietly. I've been tracking police corruption in major cities for 18 months. Your father's name came up in my research. How? 5 years ago, James Holloway was conducting an audit for the Defense Contract Audit Agency. He discovered discrepancies in police equipment procurement across 3 states. Millions in federal funds diverted to shell companies. She passed him a thumb drive. His final report was buried, but he kept personal records. Records that could expose a corruption network reaching to the governor's office. Malcolm pocketed the drive. Why are you helping us? Because I've lost 2 sources already, Judith replied grimly. One disappeared. One had an accident. Your father might be the only living person who can connect all the dots. If what you're saying is true, these people have incredible reach. How do I fight that? Judith stood to leave. You don't fight an octopus tentacle by tentacle, you aim for the head. As she walked away, she called over her shoulder, check the Cavendish Trust, that's where it all leads. Back at her office, Eleanor worked furiously, her fingers flying, across her keyboard. A quiet knock interrupted her concentration. Her assistant poked his head in. There's an Officer Mitchell here to see you, says it's about James Holloway. Eleanor tensed. Send him in. Officer Mitchell entered, nervously removing his cap. Ms. Hayes? I was one of the officers who arrested James Holloway. I think we were set up. Eleanor studied him carefully. Why come to me? Because something's happening at the precinct. Files disappearing, officers being reassigned. And this morning, Carter, my partner, didn't show up for roll call. His girlfriend reported him missing. Missing or hiding? Mitchell shook his head. His apartment was ransacked, and I received this. He held out his phone showing a text message. Stay quiet or you're next. Who sent it? Blocked number. Mitchell's hands trembled slightly. Detective Reynolds suggested I talk to you. Said, you might know what's really going on. Eleanor leaned back, weighing her options. Officer Mitchell, what I'm about to tell you could end your career. Or worse. Are you sure you want to be involved? I became a cop to uphold the law, Mitchell said, straightening his shoulders. Not to be part of whatever this is. At that moment, across town, Detective Reynolds sat in his car, reviewing old case files. His phone rang. An unknown number. Detective Reynolds, came a gravelly voice. Walk away from the Holloway case. This is bigger than you. Who is this? Someone who doesn't want to see another good cop become collateral damage. The old man stumbled onto something he shouldn't have. Leave it alone. The call ended. Reynolds stared at his phone, then at the case files spread on the passenger seat. Something caught his eye, a financial report from 5 years ago with James Holloway's signature. The same report referenced military-grade equipment purchased by the department that had never appeared in their inventory. Reynolds reached for the file, but headlights suddenly flooded his rearview mirror. A black SUV had pulled up behind him, engine idling. Reynolds slowly reached for his service weapon, but before he could react, the SUV reversed and disappeared down the street. A warning. Meanwhile, James sat alone in his cell, mentally reviewing the details of the Cavendish investigation. There had been a ledger, a physical record he'd kept separate from the official investigation. He'd documented every irregular transaction, every falsified signature, every shell company. Names, dates, account numbers, all meticulously recorded. He'd hidden it years ago, sensing the danger even then. Hidden it where only someone who knew him intimately would think to look. Hidden it in plain sight in his old office, behind the framed photo of young Malcolm at his law school graduation. James closed his eyes, hoping his son would make the connection before it was too late. In Malcolm's apartment, Eleanor examined the thumb drive from Judith Winters. This contains partial financial records from something called the Cavendish Trust. It's an offshore account in the Cayman Islands that received over $50 million from police equipment contracts. Who controls it? Malcolm asked. That's the problem. It's buried under layers of shell companies. But look at this authorization signature. She pointed to a scanned document. It matches samples from Governor Wilson's office. Malcolm studied the screen. That's not enough to build a case. No, but this might help. Eleanor pulled out her phone, showing an email from her contact. Remember that sealed file I mentioned? My source finally cracked it. It contains a single memo ordering all investigations into the Cavendish Trust closed by executive privilege, signed by Chief Huxley and countersigned by a Department of Defense official. Malcolm paced the room. So we have a corruption scandal tying the police department to the governor's office and potentially the DOD. But why move against my father now, after all these years? Maybe they're tying up loose ends, Eleanor suggested. Or maybe your father has something they desperately need to keep hidden. Malcolm stopped suddenly. The ledger. What ledger? My father always kept personal records separate from official investigations. He called it his insurance policy. Malcolm grabbed his keys. I need to get to his house before they do. It's probably already been searched, Eleanor warned. Not his house, his office, the study in his basement. He always said the safest place to hide something is where no one thinks to look. Before Malcolm could reach the door, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Reynolds. Judge Holloway, Reynolds said without preamble. I need to meet with you immediately. I believe your father's life is in danger. Where? Public places aren't safe. There's an abandoned warehouse at the corner of Fulton and 9th. Come alone. Malcolm ended the call, looking at Eleanor. That was Detective Reynolds. Wants to meet at an abandoned warehouse. You can't seriously be considering it, Eleanor said incredulously. Of course not. It's obviously a setup. Malcolm checked his watch. But it tells us they're getting desperate. We need to move fast. What's the play? You go to my father's house, find the ledger. I'll create a diversion. Make them think I'm following Reynolds' bait. Eleanor nodded, grabbing her coat. Be careful, Malcolm. These people have already shown they don't play by the rules. As they prepared to leave, Officer Mitchell's phone buzzed with a message. His face went pale as he read it. What is it? Eleanor asked. Mitchell held up the phone. The screen showed a photo of Carter's body, slumped in what appeared to be a car trunk. Below it, 3 words. Accidents happen daily. They killed him, Mitchell whispered. They actually killed him. The game had just turned deadly. The headline, splashed across the morning news sites. Judge exposes illegal detention scheme. Malcolm had pulled no punches, releasing documents proving that rookie cops had been ordered to target his father specifically. The public outcry was immediate. fueled by grainy cell phone footage of James being forced to the ground during his arrest. Chief Huxley slammed his fist on his desk, rattling the awards and commendations that covered his wall. Damage control. Now, he barked at Deputy Commissioner Wallace. I want those rookie officers front and center. Make them the scapegoats. Sir, Officer Carter is dead, Wallace reminded him, and Mitchell has disappeared. Then find Mitchell. Huxley's face was purple with rage. And get me something on the old man. Anything we can use to justify the detention. Wallace shifted uncomfortably. Sir, there's something else. Detective, Reynolds has been sharing internal department emails with a reporter from the Post. Emails specifically about illegal databases we've been maintaining on private citizens. Huxley went very still. Which reporter? Judith Winters. Huxley picked up his phone. Get me Senator Coleman, we have a problem. Across town, Eleanor entered James Holloway's modest suburban home, using the spare key Malcolm had provided. The place had already been searched. Drawers left open, furniture moved, even air vents unscrewed from the walls. But the intruders had missed the hidden office entrance behind the bookcase in the basement. Eleanor activated the mechanism Malcolm had described, revealing a small, immaculate office. Unlike the chaos upstairs, this room remained untouched. James had designed it years ago, a secure space where he could work without fear of surveillance or intrusion. She moved directly to the wall of family photos, focusing on the image Malcolm had described himself at his law school graduation, standing proudly beside his father. Eleanor carefully removed the frame from the wall, revealing a small wall safe. Using the combination Malcolm had provided, his mother's birthday, Eleanor opened the safe. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with James's meticulous handwriting. She took a photo of each page, sending them directly to Malcolm's secure server before replacing the ledger exactly as she'd found it. As she carefully reset the bookcase entrance, Eleanor heard a noise upstairs, the front door opening. Someone else had arrived. Malcolm sat in his parked car half a block from the abandoned warehouse, watching as unmarked vehicles surrounded the building. His diversion was working. They believed he'd taken Reynolds' bait. In reality, Detective Reynolds himself had called Malcolm from a burner phone 10 minutes after their initial conversation. Judge Holloway, someone used my phone to contact you, he'd warned. I think they're planning an ambush. Now Malcolm observed from a safe distance as men in tactical gear positioned themselves around the warehouse. His phone vibrated with an incoming message from Eleanor. Got it. Pages secured. Company arrived. Staying hidden. Malcolm started his car, pulling away slowly to avoid attention. The ledger pages were the evidence they needed, but they still had to get his father out of Blackwood. For that, they needed leverage. His phone rang again. Judith Winters. Judge Holloway, I need to meet now. One of my sources was just killed. Who? Officer Brian Carter. His body was found in the trunk of his car with a staged suicide note claiming responsibility for mistakes made during the Holloway arrest. Malcolm processed this information quickly. They're tying up loose ends. Exactly, Judith confirmed. And I'm probably next on their list. I have something they don't want published. A whistleblower statement from inside the department. Officer Mitchell? No, someone higher up. Deputy. Commissioner Wallace. He's agreed to testify that Chief Huxley ordered James Holloway's detention directly, calling it a matter of national security. Why would Wallace turn? Because Carter wasn't supposed to die. Things are spiraling and Wallace wants protection before he ends up as the next scapegoat. Malcolm checked his rearview mirror, making sure he wasn't being followed. Where are you now? Somewhere safe. I'll send coordinates for a meeting point. The line went dead. At police headquarters, a public affairs officer addressed a room full of reporters. The department is investigating allegations of procedural irregularities in the arrest of James Holloway. Officer Brian Carter, one of the arresting officers, has tragically taken his own life, leaving a note expressing remorse for his actions. Reporters shouted questions, but the officer raised his hands. I can confirm that Mr. Holloway is not in police custody. According to our records, he was released the same evening as his arrest. From the back of the room, a reporter called out, Then where is he? His family has filed a missing persons report. The department has no further information on Mr. Holloway's whereabouts. The press conference devolved into chaos as reporters demanded answers. Chief Huxley watched from a side room, his jaw clenched. "They're not buying it," Wallace observed. "It doesn't matter," Huxley replied. "By the time this plays out, the old man will be discredited or dead." Wallace stared at his superior. Dead? That wasn't part of the plan. Huxley turned cold eyes toward him. "Plans change. The governor can't afford what's in that ledger to go public. None of us can." Meanwhile, Officer Mitchell sat in Eleanor's office, reviewing the ledger pages she'd sent. "This is unbelievable," he said, scrolling through the documented evidence. Chief Huxley and Governor Wilson diverted millions from federal security grants into private accounts. "Not just diverted," Eleanor corrected. "According to these records, they created an illegal surveillance program using the equipment purchased with those funds, monitoring private citizens, political opponents, journalists." Mitchell shook his head. "And they're willing to kill to keep this quiet." Eleanor's phone chimed with a secure message from Malcolm. "Whistleblower secured, preparing to move." "We need to get these records to the FBI," Mitchell said. Eleanor hesitated. "Malcolm's FBI contact warned us that this corruption might extend to certain federal offices. We need to be selective about who we trust." Mitchell's face hardened. "Then we take it public. All of it. That makes us targets." "I'm already a target," Mitchell replied grimly. "At least this way, it wasn't for nothing." At a secluded lakeside cabin 30 miles outside the city, Malcolm met with Judith Winters and Deputy Commissioner Wallace. The older man's normally confident demeanor had crumbled, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. "I never signed up for murder," Wallace insisted. "The surveillance program, the financial irregularities, that was business, politics. But killing a police officer? That crosses a line." "A line you were comfortable approaching until now," Malcolm observed coldly. Wallace flinched. "I've prepared a full statement. Names, dates, operations, everything I know about the Cavendish Trust and the surveillance program." "What about my father? Where is he being held in Blackwood?" "Section C, Isolation Wing," Wallace replied. "But you'll never get to him. That facility is guarded better than most military bases." "I don't need to get to him," Malcolm said. "I need the right leverage to force his release." Wallace laughed bitterly. "You think evidence of corruption will do that? This goes beyond corruption, Judge Holloway. The surveillance program wasn't just targeting criminals or terrorists. They were monitoring federal judges, prosecutors, intelligence, officials, building blackmail files on anyone who could threaten their operation." Malcolm's phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Eleanor." "Malcolm, we have a problem," she said, her voice tight with stress. "Someone broke into my office. The ledger photos are gone and Mitchell is missing." Malcolm's blood ran cold. "When?" "Within the last hour. My assistant is in the hospital. Concussion." "What about your backup server?" "Wiped clean. These weren't amateurs." Malcolm ended the call, turning to Judith and Wallace. "They've taken Officer Mitchell and all our evidence." Judith pulled out her laptop. "Not all of it. I still have the whistleblower video I recorded with Wallace. And I have the ledger photos," Malcolm added. "I created a secure email scheduled to send the images to every major news outlet in an hour if I don't cancel it." Wallace paled. "If those go public, we're all dead." "That's the point," Malcolm replied. "Insurance." His phone rang again. Unknown number. "Judge Holloway," came a distorted voice. "We have Officer Mitchell. Exchange his life for the ledger evidence and your father's location. I want proof Mitchell's alive." A moment later, his phone chimed with a video message. Mitchell sat bloody but conscious, a gun visible at the edge of the frame. "The exchange happens at midnight," the voice continued. "Come alone to the Harbor Point warehouse. Bring all copies of the ledger." The call ended. Malcolm looked at Wallace. "They just made a critical mistake." "What's that?" Judith asked. "They asked for my father's location," Malcolm said grimly, "which means they've lost track of him. At the Blackwood Center, Agent Webb returned to James Holloway's cell, only to find it empty. He immediately triggered an alarm, sending the facility into lockdown. "What happened?" he demanded of the security officer. "Transfer order came through an hour ago," the officer explained, pulling up documentation on his tablet. Signed by Deputy Director Sanders. Webb snatched the tablet, studying the authorization. "This is forged. Sanders is in Washington today." "Sir, the prisoner was transferred by standard protocol. 2 agents, proper credentials, approved vehicle." Webb slammed the tablet down. "Find out where they took him now." Back at the cabin, Malcolm prepared for the midnight meeting. "The ledger stays secure," he told Judith. "I'll bring blank pages. By the time they realize the deception, the real evidence will be public." "And Mitchell?" Judith asked. "I'm not sacrificing him," Malcolm assured her. "But we need to be smart about this. They've clearly lost control of the situation if they don't know where my father is." Wallace, who had been silent for several minutes, suddenly spoke up. "What if they didn't lose him? What if someone else took him?" Malcolm turned. "What do you mean?" "There were rumors," Wallace said hesitantly, "about federal prosecutors building a case against the governor. Deep cover investigation, years in the making." "You think the FBI extracted my father?" Wallace shook his head. "Not FBI. Something else. Something with enough clout to override Blackwood security protocols." Malcolm's phone buzzed with another message, a single line of text from an unknown number. "Harbor Storage Unit 228, combination 11-1763. "What's the significance of those numbers?" Judith asked, looking over his shoulder. Malcolm stared at the message. "My birthday." At Harbor Storage, Malcolm cautiously approached Unit 228, Eleanor at his side. The storage facility was deserted. At this late hour, security cameras conveniently malfunctioning according to the apologetic night manager. Malcolm entered the combination. The padlock clicked open. Inside the unit sat a single chair, occupied by a man in an expensive suit. The same mysterious figure who had observed James's arrest. "Judge Holloway," the man said calmly. "I apologize for the theatrics, but security protocols must be observed." "Who are you?" Malcolm demanded. "Someone who shares your interest in the Cavendish Trust." The man handed Malcolm a business card. "No name, just a federal seal and a phone number. Your father is safe. He's been placed in protective custody as a key witness in an ongoing federal corruption investigation." Eleanor stepped forward. "Why should we believe you?" The man smiled slightly. "Because I could have had both of you eliminated at any point in the past 48 hours. Instead, I've been ensuring your evidence remains intact while preventing certain parties from silencing you permanently." "Where is my father?" Malcolm pressed. "That I cannot tell you, for his safety and yours. But I can assure you he is comfortable and being treated with respect." The man checked his watch. "In approximately 20 minutes, federal agents will arrest Governor Wilson, Chief Huxley, and 12 other conspirators involved in the Cavendish operation." "And Officer Mitchell?" Eleanor asked. "Already extracted. The men holding him are now in custody." Malcolm studied the mysterious man. "You've been watching this whole time, letting it play out." "We needed them to expose themselves," the man confirmed. "Your father's unfortunate detention accelerated our timeline, but it also flushed out actors we might have missed otherwise." "So my father was bait," Malcolm said bitterly. "No," the man corrected. "Your father was a crucial witness who possessed evidence we needed. His detention was not part of our plan, but we adapted." He stood, straightening his impeccable suit. "The evidence you've gathered will ensure these criminals face justice. Your father's testimony will be the final nail in their coffin." "When can I see him?" Malcolm asked. "Soon," the man promised, heading for the door. "Once the arrests are complete." He paused, turning back. "One last thing, Judge Holloway. This conspiracy extends beyond your city. What you've uncovered is merely one tentacle of a much larger beast." As the suited man disappeared into the night, Malcolm exchanged looks with Eleanor. The battle was nearly won, but the war, it seemed, was just beginning. Dawn broke over the city skyline as Malcolm stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters. The previous night's promised arrests had indeed occurred. The evening news had shown Governor Wilson and Chief Huxley being led away in handcuffs. But Malcolm's father remained in protective custody at an undisclosed location, and the mysterious federal operative had gone silent. Today I'm filing a federal lawsuit against the police department, the governor's office, and the operators of the Blackwood Center, Malcolm announced to the assembled press. The systematic corruption and civil rights violations perpetrated against my father and countless others cannot go unpunished. Judge Holloway, called out a reporter, given your personal connection to this case, how can you ensure impartiality? I'm filing as a private citizen, not as a judge, Malcolm clarified. The case will be assigned randomly within the federal court system to ensure complete impartiality. Another reporter raised her hand. Sources within the police department claim your father was detained as part of an ongoing national security investigation. Can you respond to that? That claim is a fabrication designed to justify illegal detention, Malcolm replied firmly. My father is a retired forensic accountant who uncovered corruption. That's why he was targeted. As the press conference continued, Eleanor slipped through the side entrance of the courthouse, carrying the legal filings. The halls were unusually quiet for a Monday morning. She approached the clerk's office and handed over the thick stack of documents. Federal civil rights action, she explained, needs immediate processing due to ongoing detention concerns. The clerk, a veteran court employee named Margaret whom Eleanor had known for years, glanced at the papers, then around the empty office. She lowered her voice. Ms. Hayes, you should know. Judge Keaton has been reassigned. All urgent civil matters are being redirected to Judge Pembroke's docket. Eleanor felt a chill. Judge Walter Pembroke was notorious for dismissing civil rights cases against law enforcement. When did this happen? Orders came down last night, Margaret whispered. Very unusual. Several case reassignments all at once. Eleanor nodded her thanks and stepped away, immediately texting Malcolm. They're stacking the deck. Pembroke got our case. Outside, Malcolm concluded the press conference and checked his phone. Reading Eleanor's message, his jaw tightened. They were being outmaneuvered before they'd even begun. Back in his office, Malcolm found a formal notice on his desk. Due to his personal involvement in an active case, he was being placed on administrative leave pending review. The letter bore the signature of Chief Judge Lawrence Harmon, a man Malcolm had considered a mentor. They're isolating you, Eleanor observed, reading over his shoulder. Cutting off your access and authority. It won't work, Malcolm replied, though doubt had begun to creep into his voice. The evidence speaks for itself. Eleanor wasn't so sure. We need to find out where they're holding your father. Without his testimony, it's our word against a system that's already circling the wagons. Malcolm's phone rang, a blocked number. Holloway, he answered. Judge Holloway, came Detective Reynolds' strained voice. I need to meet you. It's about your father. Where are you? Hospital. Someone rigged my car with an explosive device. I was lucky, got suspicious when I saw the door slightly ajar, backed away just as it detonated. Are you okay? Cuts and burns, nothing major, Reynolds replied. But they're watching me. Nurse just told me federal agents are in the lobby asking questions. What do you know about my father? Not on the phone, Reynolds insisted. But there's a thumb drive in my desk at the precinct. Bottom drawer taped under a file marked Cold Cases 2018. Get it before they do. The line went dead. Malcolm looked at Eleanor. We need to get into the 33rd precinct. That's impossible, she objected. It'll be locked down tight after last night's arrests. Not for Officer Mitchell, Malcolm countered. They don't know he's working with us now. An hour later, Mitchell entered the precinct, doing his best to appear normal despite his still visible injuries from his abduction. He nodded casually to the desk sergeant. Thought you were on medical leave, the sergeant commented. Just grabbing some personal items, Mitchell explained. Doctor says I need another week at least. The sergeant waved him through. The precinct was in chaos. Internal affairs officers conducting interviews. Evidence bags being carried out. Officers huddled. Intense conversations. Mitchell made his way to Reynolds' desk, which had already been sealed with evidence tape. Glancing around to ensure no one was watching, Mitchell broke the seal and quickly searched the bottom drawer. The cold case file was there, and taped beneath it, a small thumb drive. He pocketed it and closed the drawer, replacing the evidence tape as best he could. As Mitchell turned to leave, he found his path blocked by two men in suits. "Officer Mitchell," said the taller one, flashing a federal ID, "we'd like to ask you a few questions about Detective Reynolds." Mitchell's heart hammered in his chest. "Of course, but I'm due at my doctor's appointment. Can we schedule for later today?" The agents exchanged looks. "This won't take long," said the second agent, gesturing toward an interrogation room. As Mitchell followed them, he discreetly dropped the thumb drive into a trash can beside a water cooler. 20 minutes later, Officer Lisa Taylor, another Allie Eleanor had cultivated within the department, retrieved the drive during her coffee break and walked casually out of the building. Back at Eleanor's office, Malcolm inserted the thumb drive into a secure laptop. It contained a single video file, security footage from the Blackwood Center showing James being transferred not to federal agents, but to men in plain clothes driving an unmarked van with diplomatic plates. "That's not a federal vehicle," Eleanor noted. "Those are diplomatic tags." "Foreign intelligence?" Malcolm wondered aloud. "Or private military contractors," Eleanor suggested grimly. "Either way, your father isn't in protective federal custody like we were told." Malcolm's phone buzzed. An email notification. The subject line, "Emergency Hearing, Holloway v. City of Eastland et al. Pembroke has scheduled the hearing for tomorrow morning," Malcolm said, disbelief evident in his voice. "That's unprecedented speed." "It's not speed, it's sabotage," Eleanor replied. "They're rushing to dismiss before we can gather more evidence." The following morning, Malcolm and Eleanor entered Judge Pembroke's courtroom. The judge, a corpulent man with thinning gray hair and cold eyes, barely looked up as they took their places at the plaintiff's table. "Your Honor," Eleanor began, "we request a continuance to properly prepare—" "Denied," Pembroke interrupted. "The government has filed a motion to dismiss on grounds of national security. Let's proceed with that matter first." A new face had appeared at the defense table, Assistant U.S. Attorney Caroline Winters, representing the federal government's interests. "Your Honor," Winters addressed the court, "the government moves to dismiss this case under the state secrets privilege. Mr. Holloway's detention involves classified matters that cannot be litigated in open court without risking serious damage to national security." "That's absurd," Malcolm interjected. "My father is a retired accountant, not a spy." Pembroke glared over his reading glasses. "You'll have your turn, Mr. Holloway." "Your Honor," Winters continued smoothly, "I've submitted a classified declaration for in-camera review explaining the government's position. I'm not at liberty to discuss its contents in open court." Malcolm watched in growing horror as Pembroke nodded, reviewing the sealed documents with exaggerated care. "Ms. Hayes," Pembroke finally said, "I've reviewed the government's submission. The national security concerns are legitimate and substantive. This case is dismissed." "Your Honor," Eleanor protested, rising to her feet, "we haven't even been allowed to present evidence of the civil rights violations." "My ruling is final," Pembroke cut her off. "This matter is closed." As they left the courtroom, a courier approached Malcolm, handing him an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the governor's office letterhead, containing sworn testimony from a confidential informant claiming James Holloway had been involved in financial crimes for years. "They're framing him," Malcolm said, crumpling the paper, "creating a false narrative." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around them. One thrust a microphone toward Malcolm. "Judge Holloway, how do you respond to allegations that your father was involved in embezzling police pension funds?" Malcolm froze. "What allegations?" Another reporter jumped in. "The governor's office just released a statement claiming James Holloway was an unregistered intelligence asset who exploited his position to siphon funds offshore." "That's a complete fabrication," Malcolm replied, struggling to maintain his composure. A third reporter raised her phone. "They've released banking records showing transfers to accounts allegedly controlled by your father." Malcolm felt the ground shifting beneath him. The counter-narrative was already spreading, painting his father as the criminal. That evening, Malcolm sat in Eleanor's office as she paced furiously. "They've fabricated evidence," she fumed. "Those bank records are forgeries." "But effective ones," Malcolm noted grimly. "Half the city already believes my father is guilty." Eleanor's assistant entered with a stack of files. "This just came from our FBI contact." Malcolm flipped through the documents. Sealed court orders authorizing surveillance on James Holloway dating back 3 years, all based on credible evidence of financial crimes. They've been building this frame up for years, he realized, waiting for the right moment. "The question is why," Eleanor said. "Why go to these lengths to discredit your father?" Malcolm looked up. "Because of what he knows, what he documented in that ledger." Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Officer Mitchell. "Judge Holloway," he said urgently, "a witness just came forward claiming to have information about your father's detention, then recanted an hour later. Threatened. His exact words before going silent. They said they'd kill my family if I... So it's fate." After hanging up, Malcolm received another call, the mysterious suited man from the storage unit. "Judge Holloway," the man said without preamble, "you're being watched. Your offices are compromised. Trust no one within the system." "Who are you really?" Malcolm demanded. "Someone who wants the same thing you do. Justice. But there are forces at work here beyond your comprehension. Forces with tentacles throughout the judiciary, law enforcement, even my own organization." "Why should I believe anything you say?" Malcolm asked bitterly. "You claimed my father was in protective custody. That was a lie." A pause. "Not a lie. An assumption. His extraction from Blackwood wasn't our operation. Someone else got to him first." "Who?" "That's what concerns me," the man admitted. "The diplomatic plates suggest involvement from certain foreign interests who've been tracking the Cavendish operation for their own purposes." "What purposes?" "Judge Holloway," the man said gravely. "The Cavendish Trust isn't just about police corruption or embezzled funds. It's about a shadow network with connections to private military contractors, intelligence agencies, and foreign governments. Your father's ledger is the key to unraveling all of it." After the call ended, Malcolm stared at the phone, processing this new information. Eleanor watched him with concern. How deep does this go? She wondered. Before Malcolm could answer, breaking news flashed across Eleanor's office television. Federal judge accused of judicial misconduct. They watched in stunned silence as Malcolm's face appeared on screen, accompanied by allegations of intimidating witnesses and abusing judicial authority to pursue a personal vendetta. "They're coming after you directly now," Eleanor realized. Malcolm nodded grimly. "And they're just getting started." The following week unfolded like a nightmare. Malcolm's reputation, meticulously built over decades, crumbled under a coordinated assault. News outlets that had initially supported him now questioned his motives and ethics. Judicial review panels convened emergency sessions to examine his pattern of misconduct. Walking to his car after yet another hostile interview, Malcolm found his windshield smashed, the word corrupt spray-painted across the hood. When he arrived home that evening, his house had been vandalized, windows broken, walls defaced with similar accusations. Eleanor's firm wasn't faring better. Clients mysteriously withdrew their business. Tax auditors appeared without warning. Building inspectors discovered violations requiring immediate, costly remediation. "They're systematically destroying us," Eleanor admitted as they sat in her nearly empty office, most of her staff having resigned under pressure. Officer Mitchell had been suspended pending investigation into his unauthorized removal of evidence from Detective Reynolds' desk. Reynolds himself remained hospitalized, now with armed guards outside his room, for his protection, according to official statements. "What about Judith Winters?" Malcolm asked. "Has she published anything about the Cavendish Trust?" Eleanor shook her head. "She's gone dark. Her editor says she's on leave for personal reasons." "Threatened or bought off?" "Does it matter?" Eleanor replied wearily. "Either way, we've lost another ally." Malcolm's phone buzzed with yet another news alert. Judicial Ethics Committee recommends disbarment for Judge Holloway. He set the phone down without commenting. The committee's recommendation was a foregone conclusion, orchestrated by the same forces that had dismissed his lawsuit and smeared his father's reputation. "We need to regroup," Eleanor said, trying to rally their spirits. "They've won this round, but the game isn't over, isn't it?" Malcolm questioned. "They control the courts, the media, law enforcement. Anyone who sides with us faces destruction. Even if we had my father's testimony, who would listen now?" Eleanor leaned forward, her expression suddenly animated. "Wait, the ledger. They've been frantically trying to discredit both you and your father. What if the ledger contains something so damaging they're willing to destroy everything to keep it hidden?" "We have the photos you took," Malcolm reminded her. "But we haven't really analyzed them," Eleanor countered. "We've been so focused on the legal battle, we haven't looked deeply at what James actually documented." Malcolm nodded slowly. "You're right. Let's go through it page by page." For the next several hours, they meticulously examined every entry in James Holloway's ledger. Names, dates, account numbers, cross-references, all documented with the precision of a forensic accountant. "Look at this," Eleanor said, pointing to a recurring notation. "Cavendish Trust, primary beneficiary." "But he never identifies who that is." Malcolm frowned, studying the pattern. "It's coded somehow. My father was always paranoid about security. He wouldn't write the name directly." Eleanor squinted at the page. "There's a pattern to these account numbers. The third digit sequence repeats across multiple entries." "Not account numbers," Malcolm realized suddenly. "It's a simple substitution cipher. Letters converted to numbers." They worked feverishly, converting the numerical sequences back to letters. When the pattern finally emerged, Malcolm sat back, stunned. "Senator William Blackwood," he read aloud, "Chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee." "My God," Eleanor whispered. "That explains everything. The classification, the national security claims, the extraordinary measures to silence your father." "Blackwood controls billions in defense spending," Malcolm added. "If he's been skimming funds through the Cavendish Trust." "It's not just skimming," came a voice from the doorway. They turned to find Detective Reynolds, his arm in a sling, face still bandaged from the car bombing. "How did you get in here?" Eleanor demanded. "Your building's security is compromised," Reynolds replied. "Has been for days. I came through the service entrance." Malcolm studied the detective warily. "Why are you here?" "Because I found something else while investigating the Cavendish Trust," Reynolds said, placing a flash drive on the desk. "Something worse than embezzlement." Malcolm inserted the drive into his laptop. It contained surveillance footage and internal memos detailing a covert program using civilian populations for illegal surveillance. The program, codenamed Neighborhood Watch, employed modified police equipment to turn ordinary devices, phones, smart speakers, even appliances, into listening devices. "They've been spying on everyone," Reynolds explained. "Judges, prosecutors, politicians, journalists, anyone who might expose the operation." "That's how they've stayed ahead of us," Malcolm realized. "They've been listening to our conversations, tracking our movements, anticipating our every move, and using the information for blackmail," Reynolds added. "That's why so many officials and judges suddenly turned against you. They're being coerced." Malcolm processed this staggering revelation. "We need to get this information out. All of—" "How?" Eleanor questioned. "Every channel we might use is compromised or under surveillance." Malcolm considered their limited options. "We need to go underground. Connect with people who know how to operate outside the system. I might know someone," Reynolds offered cautiously. "An old contact from my time in FBI joint operations. He works with a network of former intelligence officers who investigate corruption." "Can you trust him?" Malcolm asked. Reynolds nodded. "He was your father's colleague years ago, Thomas Sullivan." "Sullivan," Malcolm repeated, the name triggering a memory. "My father mentioned him. Said if things ever went sideways, Sullivan was the one person I could trust." That night, in an abandoned warehouse converted into a makeshift secure facility, Malcolm met with Thomas Sullivan. a silver-haired man with piercing blue eyes, and the focused intensity of someone accustomed to high-stakes operations. "Your father and I worked together on government contract investigations," Sullivan explained. "He was the best forensic analyst I ever knew, could follow money through dozens of shell companies without losing the trail." "Do you know where he is now?" Malcolm asked. Sullivan shook his head. "Not specifically, but I believe he's being held by private contractors working for Senator Blackwood. The diplomat plates were a cover. Those men work for Sentinel Security Group, Blackwood's personal enforcement team." "Why take such risks?" Eleanor questioned. "Why not just have James killed if he's such a threat?" "Because they need to know what he shared and with whom," Sullivan explained. "James always kept his most damaging evidence compartmentalized. They know there's more than just the ledger." Sullivan's team had established a secure communication network and provided Malcolm and Eleanor with clean phones and laptops. For the first time in weeks, they could speak freely without fear of surveillance. "We've been analyzing your father's ledger," Sullivan continued, spreading printouts across a makeshift table. "The Cavendish Trust is more than just an embezzlement scheme. It's the financial backbone of a shadow intelligence operation run by private interests." "Blackwood," Malcolm surmised. "Blackwood and others," Sullivan confirmed. "They've created a state within the state, a private intelligence apparatus with tentacles throughout law enforcement, judiciary, even mainstream media." "How do we fight something that entrenched?" Eleanor asked. Sullivan pointed to a section of James's notes. "Your father documented every transaction, every participant, but he also documented something they don't know about, the original source of the funds." Malcolm leaned closer. "Which was?" "Police pension funds," Sullivan revealed. "Over $200 million siphoned from retirement accounts across 3 states. That money was used to build the surveillance infrastructure, bribe officials, and fund black operations." "Those are real people's retirement savings," Eleanor noted. "Thousands of police officers who have no idea their money was stolen." Malcolm saw the strategy immediately. "If this gets out, even corrupt officers will turn against them. Nobody touches police pensions." "Exactly," Sullivan agreed. "That's your leverage." For the first time in weeks, Malcolm felt a glimmer of hope. "We need to get this information to people who can't be silenced or bought." "My team has been building a secure distribution network," Sullivan explained. "Independent journalists, foreign news outlets, encrypted channels that can't be easily blocked." "What about my father?" Malcolm pressed. Sullivan's expression turned grave. "Once we release this information, Blackwood will know his operation is compromised. Your father becomes either a liability to be eliminated or a bargaining chip. So, we need to find him first," Malcolm concluded. "We're working on it," Sullivan assured him. "We've identified 3 possible Sentinel holding facilities where they might be keeping him." As their meeting concluded, Sullivan handed Malcolm a small device resembling a smartphone. "Secure communication only. The self-destruct activates if anyone but you attempts to access it." Malcolm nodded, pocketing the device. "Thank you, Thomas, for helping my father, for helping us." "James saved my career once," Sullivan replied simply. "I owe him everything, and what they've built with the Cavendish Trust, it's an abomination. It needs to be destroyed." As Malcolm and Eleanor prepared to leave, Sullivan offered one final warning. "Be careful who you trust, even among allies. This conspiracy has been cultivating assets for years. People who seem friendly may be reporting your every move." Later, that night in a small motel room paid for with cash, Malcolm examined the evidence Sullivan had provided. One name kept appearing throughout James's coded notes: Cavendish Trust. The connection was always the same: police pension funds flowing into privately held accounts, then dispersed through a labyrinth of shell companies. Eleanor pored over transfer records. "Look at this pattern. Every major fund transfer occurred within days of significant police equipment purchases, military-grade surveillance gear mostly. Equipment that was never actually delivered to the departments," Malcolm noted, connecting the dots. "Instead, it went to building this private surveillance network." "The pension fund angle is our best weapon," Eleanor agreed. Even corrupt cops won't stand for having their retirement stolen. Malcolm's secure device buzzed with an incoming message from Sullivan. Lead on J, possible location, Sentinel facility, Rockland County, planning extraction, stand by. For the first time in weeks, Malcolm felt the stirrings of hope. The tide was about to turn. Dawn broke over the city with a silence that belied the storm about to break. Eleanor Hayes sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by empty desks where her staff had once worked. Her computer screen displayed a simple message: Initiate sunlight protocol, YN. Her finger hovered over the keyboard before decisively pressing Y. Across the city, in newsrooms and on personal devices, the evidence began to flood in. The Cavendish Trust files, complete with transaction records, surveillance program details, and James Holloway's meticulous notes about the police pension fund theft, simultaneously reached 17 different news outlets, whistleblower sites, and social media platforms. By 9 a.m., the first headlines appeared. Massive police corruption exposed, 200 million stolen from officer pensions. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm. It's working. Stay secure. From his position in Sullivan's safe house, Malcolm watched news channels cycling through the revelations. The story was too big, too well documented to ignore or suppress. Sullivan's team had ensured the evidence reached journalists with enough independence and integrity to resist pressure. They'll try to control the narrative, Sullivan warned, monitoring police-banned radio channels. Expect denials, counter-accusations, attempts to discredit the source. Let them try, Malcolm replied. The pension fund angle is hitting hard. On screen, footage showed officers gathering outside police headquarters, demanding answers about their retirement funds. These weren't protesters or activists. These were police officers themselves, furious at the betrayal by their leadership. By noon, the FBI had publicly announced an internal corruption investigation. Their hand forced by public outrage, federal agents raided offices in the governor's mansion, seizing computers and documents. Sullivan's encrypted phone chimed with an update. Extraction team in position. Target facility confirmed. James Holloway is inside the Sentinel compound. When do they move? Malcolm asked tensely. Tonight, Sullivan replied. 23 hours. The public chaos provides perfect cover. Outside police headquarters, the crowd of officers had swelled, joined now by citizens outraged by the surveillance revelations. Signs appeared. Who's watching? The Watchers? And return our pensions. Chief Huxley, who had posted bail following his earlier arrest, emerged from the building surrounded by protective detail. This is fabricated evidence, he shouted to reporters. A coordinated smear campaign. The crowd responded with jeers and catcalls. An object flew through the air, a water bottle that narrowly missed Huxley's head. His security detail rushed him back inside. Within the hour, Governor Wilson released a statement from his attorney's office. These allegations are categorically false. Governor Wilson has served this state with distinction and will be fully vindicated when all facts come to light. But the facts were already in the light. Cold, hard financial records showing the systematic looting of pension funds, the creation of shell companies, the purchase of surveillance equipment never delivered to departments. Eleanor, monitoring the unfolding situation from her office, received an urgent call from Officer Mitchell. It's chaos at the precinct, he reported. Officers are turning on leadership, demanding answers about their pensions. The internal affairs floor is completely locked down. What about Detective Reynolds? Eleanor asked. Released from the hospital. An hour ago. He's gone public with his evidence about the surveillance program. He's being interviewed live on Channel 8 right now. Eleanor switched channels to see Reynolds, still bandaged but resolute, describing how officers were ordered to install unauthorized monitoring devices in homes and businesses throughout the city. This wasn't about fighting crime, Reynolds explained to the stunned interviewer. This was about power and control. They were building files on judges, journalists, political opponents, anyone who might threaten their operation. By mid-afternoon, protests had spread to the courthouse, City Hall, and the Blackwood Center. The National Guard was placed on standby. As tensions escalated, Malcolm received another update from Sullivan. FBI raiding Senator Blackwood's offices in Washington. Sentinel security mobilizing all assets in your area. They're panicking, Malcolm observed. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, Sullivan warned. Blackwood still has loyal enforcers who will do anything to protect him. On television, breaking news interrupted regular programming. Amateur video showed police in riot gear confronting protesters outside the governor's mansion. The situation quickly deteriorated as officers fired tear gas into the crowd. This isn't crowd control, Sullivan observed grimly. This is Huxley's loyal units trying to create enough chaos to justify a crackdown. Malcolm nodded. He's trying to drown our evidence in a bigger story. It won't work, Eleanor assured them via secure video call. The pension angle has turned most of the department against him. I'm getting reports that officers in multiple precincts are refusing orders to engage with protesters. As evening approached, Malcolm prepared for his most audacious move yet: a live television interview. Despite Sullivan's security concerns, Malcolm insisted on going public. It's our best protection, he argued. If something happens to me now, it only confirms everything we've revealed. At 8 p.m., Malcolm appeared on National News Network, facing veteran anchor Catherine Palmer. His once pristine reputation might be in tatters, but his bearing remained that of a federal judge. Dignified, authoritative, unshaken. Judge Holloway, Palmer began. These allegations against Senator Blackwood, Governor Wilson, and Chief Huxley are extraordinary. What evidence can you offer beyond the documents already circulating? The evidence speaks for itself, Malcolm replied calmly. Financial records don't lie. My father documented every transaction, every shell company, every pension fund withdrawal. But what the public needs to understand is that this isn't just about stolen money. It's about the systematic corruption of our institutions, police, courts, media, all compromised to protect a shadow operation run by people who consider themselves above the law. The governor's office claims these documents are sophisticated forgeries, Palmer challenged. Malcolm smiled thinly. Then they should welcome a full independent investigation. The FBI seems convinced enough to raid the governor's office and Senator Blackwood's headquarters. What about your father? The governor's spokesperson suggested James Holloway is actually hiding offshore with embezzled funds. My father was illegally detained and is currently being held against his will by Sentinel Security, a private military contractor controlled by Senator Blackwood. They abducted him to silence him, but they failed to secure his evidence. Palmer's eyes widened at Malcolm's directness. That's an accusation of kidnapping against a sitting U.S. senator. It's a statement of fact, Malcolm countered, and I have video evidence of my father being transferred to Sentinel operatives from the Blackwood Center. As the interview continued, Malcolm methodically laid out the entire conspiracy: the pension theft, the surveillance program, the intimidation of witnesses, the manipulation of the courts. This is not just corruption, he concluded. This is an attempt to create a private power structure operating above and outside our democratic institutions, a shadow government answerable to no one. By the time the interview ended, social media was exploding with reactions. Malcolm's calm, detailed presentation had resonated with viewers tired of political spin and denial. Sullivan met him outside the studio. Bold move. The extraction team is in final position. They move on the Sentinel facility in 90 minutes. Any word from inside? Our source confirms your father is alive, being held in the central building. Blackwood's people are scrambling, trying to decide whether to move him or eliminate the problem entirely. Malcolm checked his secure phone, a message from Eleanor. Governor Wilson just fled his residence. State police refused to provide escort. He's on his own. The pieces were falling into place, with public opinion solidly against them and their own security forces abandoning them. The conspiracy was collapsing from within. At 10:30 p.m., as Sullivan and Malcolm monitored the impending extraction operation, breaking news flashed across all channels. An audio recording had surfaced of Governor Wilson directly ordering the cover-up of James Holloway's illegal detention. I don't care what it takes, Wilson's voice declared clearly. Holloway needs to disappear. Permanently. He knows too much about Cavendish. The recording, apparently made during a secure call between Wilson and Chief Huxley, had been leaked by someone inside the governor's inner circle, rats fleeing the sinking ship. Sullivan's phone lit up with an urgent message. Extraction team compromised. Heavy resistance at Sentinel facility. Backup required. Malcolm stared at the message, blood running cold. What does that mean? It means they were expecting us, Sullivan replied grimly, already gathering equipment. Someone leaked the operation. I'm going with you, Malcolm insisted. Absolutely not, Sullivan countered. You're the public face of this fight. If something happens to you, he's my father, Malcolm said simply. I'm going. As Malcolm and Sullivan prepared to join the extraction team, Eleanor coordinated with federal prosecutors who had finally stepped in, filing RICO charges against the entire network, the police department, city hall officials, and corporate executives tied to Sentinel security. Across town, National Guard units established a perimeter around the federal building where evidence was being gathered. The city teetered on the edge of chaos, but with a crucial difference: the public now understood who the real criminals were. Rain lashed down as Sullivan's tactical team approached the Sentinel security compound. Set on 50 acres of private land and surrounded by an electrified fence, the facility resembled a military installation more than a corporate headquarters. This is where they're holding my father? Malcolm asked, studying the compound through night vision binoculars from their position in the tree line. Sullivan nodded. Sentinel maintains private detention facilities for clients with problems that can't go through official channels. Your father is in Building C, Central Complex. The initial extraction team had breached the perimeter, but encountered heavily armed resistance inside. Communication with them had been lost 30 minutes earlier. What's the new plan? Malcolm asked. Secondary entry point, Sullivan explained, pointing to a maintenance tunnel shown on the facility schematics. Less defended, but higher risk once inside. Malcolm checked the tactical vest Sullivan had provided. Let's move. Their team consisted of 6 former Special Forces operators, men and women who had once served their country before becoming disillusioned with the system they protected. Now they fought a different battle, exposing corruption from within. Remember, Sullivan cautioned, as they prepared to move, these aren't police or regular security. These are ex-military contractors, highly trained and well paid to eliminate problems without questions. They moved through the rain-soaked grounds, bypassing security sensors using equipment that would have been illegal for civilians to possess. Malcolm followed closely, acutely aware that he was the least prepared person on this rescue mission. At the maintenance tunnel entrance, Sullivan's tech specialist disabled the alarm system. We have 7 minutes before their security protocols. Force a system reset. The tunnel stretched ahead, dimly lit by emergency lighting. They moved quickly, encountering no resistance until they reached the central building's sub-level. Something's wrong, Sullivan whispered. Security's too light. Maybe the main team drew their forces, Malcolm suggested. Sullivan shook his head. They knew we were coming. They should have this place locked down tight. They emerged into a corridor lined with holding cells. Most stood empty, but in the third cell, a figure sat motionless on a metal cot. Dad! Malcolm rushed forward, security protocols forgotten. James Holloway looked up, his expression shifting from resignation to shock. Malcolm, what are you doing here? Sullivan's team quickly breached the cell lock. James stood shakily, embracing his son. You shouldn't have come. It's a trap. Before Malcolm could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in an eerie glow. Move! Sullivan ordered. Back to the tunnel! They helped James along, the older man weakened by days of captivity but still alert. As they reached the junction leading back to the tunnel, gunfire erupted from both directions. Sullivan's team returned fire, creating covering positions in doorways. They've cut off our exit, Sullivan shouted over the gunfire. We need another way out. Malcolm supported his father as they retreated into a side room, some kind of security monitoring station. Screens displayed various parts of the facility, including the main entrance where several black SUVs had just arrived. Those aren't Sentinel vehicles, Sullivan observed, studying the newcomers disembarking with tactical gear. Those are federal agents. FBI? Malcolm asked hopefully. Sullivan zoomed in on their insignia. No, something else, higher clearance level. James pointed to another screen showing a helipad on the roof. That's our way out. Sullivan, do you still have air support? On standby, 15 minutes out, Sullivan confirmed. But we need to reach the roof. The security station provided access to the building's systems. Sullivan's tech specialist quickly located the emergency stairwell routes. East stairwell is our best option. Less coverage from security cameras. They moved carefully through the corridors, avoiding direct confrontation where possible. James, despite his weakened condition, kept pace, his mind clearly focused on escape. Did you secure the ledger? He asked Malcolm as they climbed the stairs. We have it all, Malcolm assured him. The Cavendish Trust, the pension theft, the surveillance program. Everything's public now. James nodded with satisfaction. Then Blackwood is finished. Blackwood is just one head of the Hydra, Sullivan cautioned. This goes deeper than a single senator. As they reached the 4th floor, gunfire erupted from below. Sullivan's team took defensive positions, returning fire to cover their continued ascent. 2 more floors, Sullivan called out. Extraction chopper is inbound. Suddenly, the stairwell door above them opened. Malcolm raised his weapon instinctively, but Sullivan pushed it down as a familiar figure appeared. The same well-dressed man who had met Malcolm at the storage unit. This way, the man said urgently. My team has secured the roof access. Sullivan hesitated. Who are you really? National Intelligence Oversight Division, the man replied. We've been building a case against this network for years. You used us as bait, Malcolm accused. We used the chaos you created as cover to insert our team, the man corrected. Now move before this entire operation collapses. They followed him through a maze of corridors, the sounds of gunfire echoing throughout the building. Multiple forces were clearly engaged in combat below. Sentinel security, federal agents, possibly local law enforcement. The building is being seized by 3 different agencies, each with their own agenda, the suited man explained as they hurried toward the roof. Welcome to interagency cooperation. As they burst onto the rooftop, rain lashing down around them, a helicopter approached. Through the storm clouds, searchlight scanning for the extraction point. There's our ride, Sullivan shouted over the roar of the approaching aircraft. The roof access door crashed open behind them. Armed men in tactical gear poured out, weapons raised. Their leader stepped forward, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes. Senator Blackwood, James Holloway said, his voice carrying despite the helicopter noise. Still doing your own dirty work? James, Blackwood acknowledged with a tight smile. You've been a persistent problem for too long. It's over, Senator, Malcolm declared. The evidence is public. The FBI is raiding your offices. Your operation is finished. Blackwood laughed, the sound chilling even against the storm. You think this was my operation? I'm just the public face. The infrastructure you exposed is the mere tip of the iceberg. He's stalling, Sullivan warned as the helicopter drew closer to the landing pad. You exposed one network in one city, Blackwood continued. But we control police departments across the country. The true power isn't in the pension funds or even the surveillance program. It's in what we've built with those resources. A private intelligence apparatus that answers to corporate interests, not elected officials. You're a United States Senator, Malcolm said incredulously. Why betray everything you swore to protect? Because the system is broken, Blackwood replied simply. Corporations run this country anyway. We just made it official, removed the middlemen. He raised his weapon. Unfortunately, none of you will live to share that revelation. Before he could fire, the suited man stepped forward, his own weapon drawn. Senator Blackwood, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, kidnapping, and about 15 other federal charges. You don't have the authority, Blackwood sneered. Actually, I do, the man replied, revealing a badge. Special Prosecutor Jackson Harlow, Department of Justice. We've had you under surveillance for 18 months. The helicopter touched down. on the pad as federal agents poured onto the roof from other access points. Blackwood's men, realizing they were outnumbered, lowered their weapons. Blackwood himself stood defiant. "This changes nothing. The network remains intact. I'm just one node in a system too big to dismantle." "We'll take our chances," Harlow replied, nodding to his agents to take Blackwood into custody. "And we have James Holloway's complete records, not just about Cavendish, but about every operation you've been involved with for the past 20 years. As Blackwood was led away, Malcolm turned to his father. "Is he right? Is this bigger than just Blackwood and his operation?" James nodded grimly. The Cavendish Trust was created by a consortium of defense contractors, private equity firms, and foreign interests. They've been building influence networks in major cities across the country. Blackwood was their political protection, but the money behind it comes from corporate boardrooms. Sullivan helped James toward the waiting helicopter. "That's a fight for another day. Right now we need to get you to safety." As they lifted off into the stormy night, Malcolm watched the chaos unfolding below. Federal agents leading Sentinel, operatives away in handcuffs, evidence being seized. The private army that had seemed so invincible now collapsing under the weight of its exposed crimes. In the helicopter, Harlow handed Malcolm a satellite phone. "There's someone who wants to speak with you," Malcolm answered cautiously. "This is Judge Holloway." "Judge Holloway," came a woman's voice, authoritative and direct. "This is Attorney General Rebecca Mitchell. I want to personally thank you for your persistence in this matter. The corruption network you exposed represents one of the most significant threats to national security we've uncovered in decades." "Thank you, Madam Attorney General," Malcolm replied, watching his father's relieved expression. "But we couldn't have done this without help from within the system. Yes, Prosecutor Harlow has kept me briefed on his undercover operation. We had to maintain strict compartmentalization. Even I didn't know all the details until recently." "What happens now?" Malcolm asked. "The arrests are ongoing. Governor Wilson was apprehended attempting to board a private jet. Chief Huxley is in federal custody. Senator Blackwood's arrest will be announced tomorrow morning. As for the broader conspiracy, that investigation is just beginning." After the call ended, Malcolm sat beside his father, the helicopter carrying them away from the compound where James had been imprisoned. "I thought I'd lost you," Malcolm admitted quietly. James clasped his son's hand. "They underestimated both of us. They always do." Sullivan approached, holding a secure tablet. "You should see this." The screen showed live news coverage, crowds gathering outside police headquarters, the courthouse, City Hall. But they weren't angry mobs. They were citizens holding candles, demanding justice and accountability. "The city is waking up," Sullivan observed. People understand what was happening now. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light through the helicopter's windows, a call came through from Eleanor. "Malcolm, they're falling like dominoes. The FBI just arrested 6 judges for taking bribes from the Cavendish network. The police union has voted to clean house completely, and the pension funds. We might actually recover most of that money." "It's really over," Malcolm said, glancing at his father. James shook his head slowly. "No, it's just beginning. Blackwood was right about one thing. What we exposed is just one branch of a much larger system. The real power behind this operates in boardrooms, not government offices." "Then we keep fighting," Malcolm declared, his resolve hardening. "We exposed one network. We can expose them all." As the helicopter banked toward the rising sun, Harlow received a message on his secure phone. His expression darkened as he read. "Problem?" Sullivan asked. "Maybe," Harlow admitted. "One of our intelligence assets just flagged unusual activity. Someone's accessing classified systems, purging records connected to Cavendish operations in other cities. The corporate backers covering their tracks," James suggested. Harlow nodded grimly. "This victory is significant, but the war is far from over." The helicopter descended toward a secure federal facility where James would provide his formal testimony. On the ground, agents waited to escort them inside. As they disembarked, a distinguished man in a dark suit approached Malcolm. "Judge Holloway, a word in private?" Malcolm glanced at Sullivan, who nodded subtly. They stepped aside from the others. "My name is Director Phillips, National Security Council," the man said quietly. "What you've accomplished is remarkable, but you've now attracted attention from very powerful interests, people who operate beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement." "Are you warning me or threatening me?" Malcolm asked directly. "Neither. I'm recruiting you." Phillips handed Malcolm a plain business card with only a phone number. "Your particular combination of legal expertise and moral courage is rare. We need people like you for what comes next." "Which is what, exactly?" Phillips glanced toward the sunrise. "You've won a battle in one city, but this war is being fought in every major metropolitan area in the country. The same network, different faces. When you're ready to continue the fight, call that number." As Phillips walked away, Malcolm rejoined his father and Sullivan. James looked at the card in Malcolm's hand. "Another shadow operative?" he asked. Malcolm pocketed the card. "Apparently this isn't over." "It never is," James replied with the weary wisdom of someone who had fought this battle for decades. "Systems of power don't surrender easily, but we've struck a significant blow today." As they entered the secure facility, Malcolm glanced back at the rising sun. One network exposed, one city reclaimed from corruption. It was a start, but the war, as Director Phillips had suggested, was just beginning. As the shadows of corruption recede, ask yourself, how many institutions that you trust today are silently watching you, cataloging your vulnerabilities, corrupting the protections you take for granted? The Holloways exposed one network in one city, but how many more remain hidden behind badges, gavels, and official seals? If this story of justice kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that challenge the powerful and expose the truth behind the systems we trust.